What is it about having a great mealtime together that's relaxing and enjoyable?
We go around the table and we talk about what was the best part of your day, what was the worst part of your day.
There is something about being able to just sit down and have a meal with somebody that is just disarming.
If we were home, we sat around the table and had a meal together. I think I probably take it for granted because it was just what we did.
And then Sarah, being single, and how does that work with family meals, or what is that a wrong?
I don't know. It's just thanks for pointing that out, Bret.
I do find it intriguing that Jesus, the night before he died, he sat down and had a meal with his disciples. There was something to that. The table is a metaphor for something greater. It's what the church is supposed to be. I don't know how many of you single men knew Sarah was single, so I'll just leave it at that. I think she's in the building this morning, though. Just going to leave that right there, okay? She's probably going to be leaving the building real soon. That's kind of how that works. So, welcome everybody. We have 12 values around here that kind of define who we are. A lot of organizations and churches do that sort of thing, kind of state who they are in terms of emphasis of personality as a church. And one of them, we say it this way, is we live with authenticity. We live with authenticity because no one likes a phony, least of all Jesus. No one likes a phony, least of all Jesus. Jesus was known as part of his character that he raged against hypocrisy. He hated insincerity, especially in religious categories. He was just known for being that way. And so in the spirit of that, much of this morning is going to be about that. I want to ask you a question that you're going to answer in the privacy of your own heart and mind. And it's especially directed for those of you who would consider yourselves Christ-following people. And it's not to the exclusion of those of you who don't, but it's particularly relevant to those who do. And I'd ask it this way. Do you ever get, I know you get discouraged probably in the process, of trying to follow Jesus. You ever get discouraged? But do you ever get disappointed with it? Or even further, have you ever been disillusioned inside of it? We get discouraged, but have you ever been disappointed? Have you ever been even disillusioned with it? Now, I know some of you well enough to know that you'd be like, nope, absolutely not. I don't know what your problem is, but no, I never do that. Others of you, and I think it's probably the majority, would say yes to that along some line. Some of you may even say that right now. That's exactly where I am right now. Now, those of you in the first group need to know that those in the second group don't like you at all, okay? You just need to know that. Yeah, we don't kind of enjoy people who are just, I never had any problems with it, never discouraged, never any of that sort of stuff. I've been thinking that the story around this message today is very interesting for me because first of all, it was supposed to be something different. And it just kept stirring all summer long. I knew, and finally I just pulled the original plan off the schedule and just landed this one here because I kept picturing in my mind a story from Jesus' life that we're going to look at today. And it just kept coming back to me over and over and over again. It's one of my favorite stories there, but it's also one of the most meaningful and important stories, I think, for reasons hopefully we'll outline. But it addresses that issue, I think, as good as anything I know about in all of the Bible and all of human literature, that issue of trying to walk this act of faith, but doing it during disillusionments and discouragements and everything else. It's a vivid picture of that. And it just so happens, though, as I was kind of thinking about this, I watched over the summer, it was an interesting time, I watched a young wife bury her husband. I watched a young husband bury his wife. I watched a young couple bury their child. I even watched a student bury a friend. And for those of you who may not know, as of last night, I became a son burying his father. And he was struggling with Alzheimer's, and we were kind of in the beginning parts of that journey, but it was fairly sudden, and we don't know exactly what happened, but we were over there last night, and he passed away. So. And for those of you who may think it's very odd for me to even be here right now, I honestly, truly felt like it was the right thing to do, especially in light of what we're talking about. because it's a little bit more real to me, but also I'm absolutely positively positive that my dad would want me to, especially because today's a story. My dad read the Bible probably more times than most people you'll ever met. He knew it backwards and forwards, and he loved the stories. And he would always tell me that, Bret, you got to preach on the stories. He say all the time, the stories, it's about the stories. I wish I would have listened to him more because he's right. He just loved the stories. Also, his standard for me, it was anytime I preached, he would say, how'd it go, son? And I'd say, well, it seemed pretty good. He said, did anybody boo? And I'd say, no. He'd say, you did good. That was the standard. I'm like, all right, so please, nobody boo. Not today. I mean, if you're thinking about booing, just don't do it today. You can do it any other week. Just in honor of Dad, all right? So anyway, the story is found in John chapter 11. And I highly encourage you, here's what we're gonna do. I'd like you to go, if you have the Bible on your phone or if you have the Bible on paper in your lap or whatever, or follow along on the screens. But we're gonna go through the story itself kind of piece by piece and look at it from lots of different angles and just kind of examine it. And then at the end, what I wanna do is just give you a few key principles to help with this whole disillusionment, discouragement thing by the end. The story is famous to many of us. Maybe many of you have heard it before. It's the story of the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Jesus raised a guy from the dead named Lazarus. And the story has a lot of details in it I think are just intriguing, and it starts this way. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and Martha, his sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Now we're gonna stop right there and just do a little bit of framing here. First of all, we're talking about a town called Bethany. This is very important. Bethany is right close to Jerusalem. Jerusalem's the capital city. It's the big metropolitan area, but there's this little village that sits about just like 2 miles from Jerusalem. It's kind of Evansville, Newburgh kind of setup, and that's where Mary and Martha and Lazarus hung out or lived, and Jesus used to hang out there apparently from what we know about his life. That's where he would go to be at their home. They were his friends. That's the first thing you know. The second thing you need to know is in the previous chapter, in the larger context, Jesus had been in Jerusalem and he got in trouble with the Jewish leaders. And he especially got in trouble. They tried to kill him. And here's why. The reason is very intriguing. It's because they claimed that he was claiming to be equal with God. And it says they picked up stones to stone him. You're claiming to be equal with God, which is an interesting charge against Jesus, and he escapes. And what he does is he goes to a place called Perea, which is about 20 miles from where they were. That's if you were to take off and walk from here to Mount Vernon, Indiana, that's roughly about the distance walk that it was. And that's kind of important to the story as well. But then I want you to notice a couple deeper kind of ideas contained in that paragraph. And one of them is that Jesus says the sickness will not end in death, and it does, which is kind of a strange little thing that we'll talk about as we go. But he said, and this is very, very, very important, this whole thing is going to be for God's glory and that the Son will be glorified. God's glory and the Son will be glorified. That's with everything that you're about to watch. Keep your eyes on that idea. That's critical. Now, the problem with that idea is I get a little nervous with it when we say glory, glorified, and all that sort of thing. It's a very Bible word, it's a very religious word, but I'm not sure we appreciate what it means. Glory, if you translate the word glory there, it simply means literally brightness, extent of brightness. And a thing can have glory, a person can have glory, God can have glory. It's the level of brightness, but what's used as is a metaphor for importance or weight. Something like that. A human example is Aretha Franklin. You know, she died just recently. And she was a person that had, in our culture, had a glory to her. And if she would have showed up on this platform, if you had any sense at all, you would be in awe of Aretha Franklin because of her background, her talent, her history, just this iconic figure that she was. That's an example of human glory, human weight and importance. The layers of meaning, and more people are like that. There's kind of this added glory to what's going on. And he says that this entire thing that happened to Lazarus is for God's glory and that the Son will be glorified. Keep your eye on that. And then one last idea before we move on is it says twice in the paragraph, Lazarus was loved And it adds that his sisters were loved by Jesus. Jesus loved them. Be clear on that. Now, I know, and I don't think the author really means it this way, like Jesus loves all the little children, he loves all the little children of the world. I don't think he's talking about, he does, he loves everybody, but I think the writer is really trying to point out Jesus loved them in even a friendship way. There was something about this little group of people, he felt comfortable in their home, they were friends. He was someone, he really truly had an affection kind of love for these people in particular, and that's very important to the story as well. Then listen what it says next. And I'm going to repeat the last line so you get this. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Now listen to the next line. He loved them. So, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. As if there's a logical connection between those 2 words. Isn't that weird? He loved them. So, when he heard he was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And does that make any sense at all? Of course not. I mean, think about Mary and Martha. They've reached kind of this pivot point. This is not, they wouldn't have sent for him a day's journey. It'll take you, Google says it'll take, if you were to walk to Mount Vernon, it'd take you about 7-8 hours, something like that, okay? So it's a day's journey. They sent messengers, and you know they didn't send messengers to Jesus because Lazarus had a backache that day. Or he went around going, man, I don't feel 100%, I don't know, my nose is running. It would have been because they watched him get sick, just like everybody gets sick, but they were expecting him to get well. But at some point, there was a pivot point that they said, this is serious. We need to call Jesus. And put yourself in their place. They knew Jesus, they were friends with him. And Jesus' M.O., when you went to a Jesus concert or crusade or whatever they called him back then, healing was a part of the gig. That's what he did. He healed the masses. They had watched him heal strangers. They had watched him raise the dead, help people paralyzed, blind eyes seeing, deaf ears hearing. He had watched them do all of that stuff. And so they send for him and they say, hey, the one you love is sick. Now, when you hear that someone is at that pivot point sickness, what do you do if you love somebody? You, right that second, I'm going, I'm there. But it says he waited where he was 2 days. 2 days. Watch that. And then he said, let's go back to Judea. Now we're going to have to hydroplane over this next part, but there's a couple things that are noteworthy. The disciples replied, but Rabbi, they said a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you. Remember we said that. And yet you're going back? Jesus said, are there not 12 hours in daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they will stumble. They have no light. That's just Jesus' way of saying, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. I have exactly as much time as I'm supposed to have to accomplish what God has called me to do. And by the way, you and I do as well. After he said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. Listen, he defines death differently again. I get a kind of a kick out of what his disciples say. His disciples replied, well, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, and there he kind of shifted the terms again. Now listen to this, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. I just kind of see this. They're risking their lives. They really do think it's natural sleep. And he says, we're going to go back to Judea where they were trying to kill me. Let's go. And they think they're going to get harmed, and it's so you can wake this guy up? Think about how much sense that would not make. Let's go back. Let's risk our lives so Jesus can go, hey, Lazarus, wake up. That kind of thing. This is kind of an odd picture, isn't it? They had to be thinking, what are we doing now? So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Interesting line here. And for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. I think he's one of the things that I watch people go through stuff. Sometimes I think it's for other people's sake. He said, for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. I think he was sad he wasn't there for Mary and Martha and Lazarus' sake. Then Thomas, also called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Okay, so there's a picture. He's waited 2 days. He's headed back. The next passage starts this way. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Mary and Martha to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but note this little tagline, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now he will give you whatever you ask. Now, guys, what I want to ask you to do at this point is I want you to enter in. I want you to forget that these are Bible characters and you've seen movies or you've seen little cartoons that illustrate. I want you to enter in and try to put yourself in their place. These are real people, real time, real things going on. And I want you to imagine the timeline that they're on. One of the things that we know from the Bible about Mary and Martha, their personality, Martha's kind of the practical one. She's kind of the more the active, practical one. And Mary is the seemingly more contemplative, kind of spiritual one. But think about the timeline that they've lived through, because this is critical to this entire thing and critical to how it applies to you and I. Get the picture. They sent for Jesus. He's sick. We're not just talking about a backache. We're talking about he's reached a pivot point. We think it's very, very serious. And by the way, we have good status with you. You love us. We're not one of the crowd. The one, how do they say it? The one you love is sick. So what did they expect? They had to get hit first. Remember, when Jesus finally gets there, he had been in the tomb for 4 days. So that means that Mary and Martha had to look over there at that bed and watch their brother writhe in pain. You see, all of us have been sick, 2 kinds of sick. Most likely, I've never been all the way up to the point of death, but there's 2 kinds of sick. There's the kind of sick where you can lay in your bed, you can read a book and watch TV, you just don't feel up to speed. But there's some sickness that becomes your reality. It's all there is for you. That's it. And remember, Lazarus was sick and he ends up dying. It's that kind of thing. And imagine it back in those days when they didn't have modern medicine or any of that kind of stuff. You can just see Martha running around the kitchen thinking up all kinds of her homespun remedies, giving him things, kind of shove chicken noodle soup down his throat or something like that. Then you got Mary over there. You know she was laying on that floor just begging and pleading and praying and just going. And then think about Lazarus. Don't forget him. Did you call him? Where is he? Why isn't he here? I don't think I'm going to make it. This hurts. 4 days he was in the tomb. That means they walked all the way through. He's getting sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. And then finally they reach the moment where everything stops. And somebody doesn't feel a heartbeat and everybody goes into denial first. And you see that look of death on his face. And the shock and the horror and the denial. I watched that happen just last night, my stepmom. No, you're not telling me the truth. He's not gone. Crowd of people hugging one another, crying, falling on the body, the whole deal. It was Jewish burial tradition. We have our traditions, they had theirs. They would take the body of the dead loved one and they would bathe them out of honor to them, clean them off, make them not look as bad as they probably would have been by that point. And then they would gently wrap them in cloths. And so they wouldn't put them in a coffin or anything. They would just, the family, it was habit about an 8-hour period. They would then, relatives would come over to the home and mourn. It says many people came from Jerusalem, there with them, bringing food, doing all the things that we do. Instead, the family would have take turns kind of carrying him on their shoulders out to a tomb. And the whole time in front, people are just screaming and crying because without question, the other thing we got to remember is Lazarus was most likely a young guy. This is more of a tragic thing. And all the while, think about it. Every moment, they're looking over that hill. I think the first shot of disillusionment happened when the messengers came back and Jesus wasn't with them. Where's Jesus? Did you talk to him? Yeah, we talked to him. What did he say? We didn't say much. We just left and came back. You mean he didn't follow you? Or maybe he's coming an hour later, or maybe he's coming an hour later. Think about those moments leading up to there. They would have looked over that hill and thought, oh, I think I see him. No. Oh, Hope, disappointment, hope, disappointment, hope, disappointment, hope, disappointment, over and over and over and over and over again. They even knew that Jesus raised people from the dead, and all the stories that we have, though, are usually within an hour or so. So again, keep in mind, he found him in the tomb for 4 days. Interesting little sidelight. You know, it was Jewish superstition of that day was they believed that a person's spirit would linger near their body for 3 days, just in case anything might reverse. So in other words, even that hope was lost. And I can't prove this, but I think I can make a case that the reason Martha ran out there is because she's the practical one. But what was the first thing out of her mouth? If you'd have been here, my brother wouldn't be dead. But it says Mary stayed at home. And I can't put kind of words in her mouth or thoughts into her mind, but I think she was wrestling very, very deeply with that. We watched you heal strangers. We've watched you heal crowds. We sent message to you that the guy you love, you hung out with, and you didn't show up. You were never here. He's in the tomb. It's over. And then next, Jesus does arrive. He says to her, he says to Martha, here's a response. Your brother will rise again. And I see that at first coming across as that's the kind of things we say to people all the time. Well, he's in a better place. He's gone to heaven. You know, he'll rise again. All Jews believed that the people would rise again at the end of the age, somewhere in the distance. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection in the last day. She's probably thinking, yeah, I know that part. But then Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they may die. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you're the Messiah. I believe you're the Son of God who has come into the world. I believe all the things I'm supposed to believe. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, but why in the heck is my brother in the grave? And then what we're about to get in the next little movement of this story is what I believe is one of the most beautiful and interesting and mysterious and artful portraits of God Almighty in all the Bible. Watch what it says. After she had said this, she went back, called her sister Mary aside. The teacher's here, she said, and he's asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and she went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet entered the village, but he was still at a place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, what? Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. If you would have been here. It's kind of a constant refrain. And then watch what happens. Here's the beautiful picture. Because remember, she's accompanied by a crowd. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? Come and see, Lord, Jesus replied. And then the famous, smallest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. And this word, every commentator I read this, is a very strange thing. This word deeply moved is a very unique kind of word in the original language, and they said it's hard to translate. They said it literally means to snort like a horse, which is a very bizarre thing to say. But what they say is it's like a picture of someone, they fight over whether Jesus was angry or Jesus was deeply saddened, and I think it was a combination of both. There was this sound he made. When look at him, he's standing in the middle. He's watching people in pain. He's watching them doubled over, just hurting and crying about who they lost. And thankfully, he doesn't stand over them and say, hey, it's all okay. I'm going to raise this guy in a few minutes. It says he was deeply moved. And then they said a technical word Jesus was translated is that he wasn't wailing, but they said it's a picture of someone standing there and it's kind of softly with his shoulders going up and down, his tears just streaming down his face. Because I don't know if you've ever had this happen before, but if you've ever, the only thing that's worse than suffering through something yourself is watching someone you care about deeply suffer through something. You ever had that happen? I hate to bring it up. I would always say the worst picture I've ever seen in my life was when a good friend of mine passed away, and I watched his brother tell his kids when they got home from school. And just, you watch the pain on someone's face. It's just raw and unedited. And I think that's what was going on. Jesus, you look around, he's deeply moved by it. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But then listen what they say. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? That was the question of the hour. Jesus, once more, deeply moved, keep your eye on that, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across. You can visit that to this day. They think they found the actual one. Take away the stone. He said, now this is there's a little comedy relief moment here because of Martha. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor for he's been there 4 days. Do you see the tomb? They're starting to do that. She's like, no, please don't do that. I know you're a really spiritual guy and everything, but I understand what this is going to be like. This is going to stink. I mean, it's something bad. And I hate to say this as well. I've only smelled that smell once in my life. And I'm telling you, it is on a whole nother order. It is the nastiest thing you've ever smelled. It's something you'll never, ever forget, too. And so they know what that's like. For he's been in there 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you see the glory of God? She's probably thinking, can I see the glory of God while I'm going like this? And I guarantee you there was dozens of Jewish people out there going like this too. Like, he's gonna roll the stone away? Holy cow, everybody ducked for cover. Here it comes. So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing there, that they may believe that you sent me. When he said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. This is just such a cool picture. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped in strips of linen, cloth around his face. He's kind of doing one of these. And Jesus said to him, take off the grave clothes and let him go. I love the lack of drama in his voice. Oh, you might want to take off those strips of clothes. He'd walk away and went to eat fried chicken or something. I don't know what he did, But I want you to just get that scene. Everybody standing there. And they've been through the grief. They've been through the questions. They've been through the hardship. They've been through the disillusionments. They've been through all that stuff. It's just gotten as dark can get. There is no hope even in their own superstitions. And they watch this guy walk out. It would have been mind blown beyond. Have you ever been through something and then found on the other side the relief that comes when we give a book out called The Reason for God, and the guy that wrote it tells a real interesting story. He said he once had a nightmare where everybody in his family died. Everybody in his family died. But when he woke up, he said the joy of seeing they were still there took his appreciation for them and his wonder and the beauty of life and family and everything else to a level he had never experienced before in his life. It was one of those kind of moments, like going from darkness to raw light, because what was the point of the entire story? God's glory. So here's what I want to do. I want you to remember all those things we just covered. I'm going to give you just a few things, kind of just sentences that I've kind of summed up, and I want you to walk out with if you struggle with disillusionment, and it's this. First one's this. Always remember, we, those of us who are followers of Jesus, and others as well, are in the story of God's glory. And I don't mean to say it with a cute little rhyme. I couldn't think of any other way to say it. We are in the story of God's glory. You see, when we look back on that story and we read it, oh, isn't that a nice story? Jesus raised Lazarus. We ought to teach Sunday school about that and have little pictures and cartoons and stuff. We don't live through the actual thing that these people went through, the emotions that they felt. We're in the story of God's glory. Now, this is something I cannot prove, but I think I can make a very, very, very good case for this. And I want you to hear me on this. I maintain for believers that this story is actually it's a real thing that really, really happened, but I believe it's a representative story of us. I would maintain that we are, believers in Jesus, are Mary and Martha and Lazarus. We experienced the delay. Jesus was raised after 3 days. Lazarus was raised after 4, and there was a very heart-wrenching, hard, disillusioning, struggling delay. And that's the time that we are in right now. But always remember, we're in the story of God's glory. Here's the second thing I want you to remember. This is very, very important. Jesus loves you, although sometimes it can seem like he doesn't. Jesus loves you, although sometimes it can seem like he doesn't. They had special status. It was very clear from the scripture, Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus. He loved them. But you know, as it was leading up to the death, as they were in that 4-day period, nothing looked like he loved them at all. Have you ever asked yourself, well, if he loved me, this wouldn't be happening. If he loved me, that wouldn't be happening. Don't say, it's okay to say it, but you've got to remember there's a larger picture coming. And remember this, the third principle is, in a mysterious way, God enters into and identifies with our pain. In a mysterious way, God enters into and identifies with our pain. Did you watch Jesus? He didn't go in and say, hey, everybody, I've got control of this. Everybody, he's going to be raised any minute. Just calm down. Why? And I don't even know why. That's why I call it mysterious. I don't even know why. The God of the universe, when you're going through pain and you're going through disillusionment and you're going through discouragement, he feels that. He watches. He enters into. It says he's near the brokenhearted and he binds up their wounds. And that's a mystery and it's weird and I don't know why he does it, but he does it. And the final one's this. Because of the resurrection, there is hope. Because of the resurrection, there is hope. I think this is the most underrated Christian doctrine there is. First of all, Jesus rose again from the dead. We all believe that. But you know it's the promise that we will rise again from the dead. Not just go to heaven when we die where our spirits are up there with him. But your body, your loved one's body, its corruption will be reversed. All the tragedy and the horror of living in this life, the things that have disillusioned us will be undone, will be added to the story of God's glory. We'll all go, and it will be a mind-blowing thing. The same writer of the book that we give out says this, always remember at the resurrection of the believer, everything sad is going to become untrue, and it will somehow be greater for having once been broken and lost. I'm going to say it again. Everything sad is going to become untrue, and it will somehow be greater for having once been broken and lost. And that's where you and I need to live, with hope, because we're in that 4-day period. But the story of his glory is coming. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the team to come up, and I've run them up against a time limit, so maybe they can do the song twice as fast as normal, but it's okay. They can come on up if they're around. You guys, okay, there they go. But we're going to do a song called the Lazarus song. I want to challenge you on a couple things. One is this. If you're disillusioned, I understand. I've been there. Certain categories in my life lead to it. I know what it's like. And I think about that story all the time. And I think about that weight. And I think about that ending. And just remember, just carry that story in your head as long as you live. And then for those of you who may not believe, where's your hope? This stuff is real. Jesus rose again from the dead, and it means that hope is real. And it's not just the hope that a religious guy 2,000 years ago got out of the grave. It means that those of us who follow him, those of us who have faith in him, we will rise again. And those you buried will rise again. And all that is sad and broken is going to be undone. And it will be better because somehow, in some weird way that we don't understand until we see it, like those people that were holding their noses, when that time comes. And this song celebrates that. So everybody stand together, we'll do it, and then everybody apologize profusely to the kids ministry when you pick your kids up late.